Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, control your
What is up,
life.
beautiful people? Welcome to the 817 podcast, where we talk everything Fort Worth, from culture, business, trends about this lovely city, and bring it to you every Monday morning. Jimmy, what's good?
I don't know what to say. I don't know. I just froze. Usually we do this on Sunday late mornings. We're doing it on Friday night this week. And the routine's just a little thrown off.
Yeah, and with it being thrown off, we're going all in on this pod. We are deciding that we are going to have this be an endorsement episode for one of the mayoral candidates. To be honest, as I speak to you, I don't know if we have this confirmed yet. Maybe we do. But hey, by the end of this, the 817 podcast will have an endorsement for Fort Worth Mayor, and we're really excited to tell you who that is.
EJ's just scared you guys are going to get mad at him for whatever he says. So maybe it'll be just me talking about it, but no, we're a unified front.
We are. And but before we dive into telling you guys who we're going to endorse for mayor, let's actually talk about the chamber panel. I mean, I guess the chamber forum. I don't know what you call a panel when it's on Zoom, because they're not like in a panel. They're kind of, the Brady Bunch thing.
Yeah, and the ombudsman goes out a couple times. And
yeah,
all that fun stuff.
We were planning to do a chamber specific panel, episode, but it wasn't like, we felt like it was kind of a snooze fest. So we didn't really decide to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it was on Wednesday at 11 a.m., which, everybody's free on Wednesday at 11 a.m. apparently. But that was reflected in only 4 of 10 candidates showing up, which it's not surprising. Like, Dr. Bird didn't show up, There we go. He runs a medical practice. Like, 5 other candidates didn't show up.
He's funding his own campaign. He has to work.
Like, these people have jobs, and you only get paid like $20,000 as mayor. So it's not like
it's pretty good money. We looked this up the other day. I looked this up with someone. I swear it's like $170.
No, Fort Worth mayor gets paid $25,000.
Okay.
And the city councilors get paid $20,000. It was there was an article from the Star Telegram a couple months ago about how Fort Worth is run more like a suburb, and part of that is reflected in its funding of our public servants. And I mean, if you're the mayor, you're working easily 80 hours a week. So I don't know what the math is on that, but your dollars per hour is definitely not living wage.
Yeah, no, I think it's, let's look here. I'm looking
But city manager makes like $400K, something in that range.
Yeah, this San Francisco mayor, London Breed, this is old, $301,000. It's also 119 more than what Columbus, Ohio. The difference in pay between Fort Worth Mayor Betsy Price and Dallas Mayor Mike Rawlings, so this is an old article, is $31,000. Similarly mismatched, but the job requirements and populations of the cities are very different. Still not getting anywhere. But yeah, anyways, this is not the main part of the story. Obviously, he makes more money being a doctor.
Yeah.
So he has to do that. You know who I want to be next in the next candidacy? I might run for mayor next time just so I could be DC Caldwell. The amount of time we give this man, the amount of time DC gets to talk to the city is the most best dollar for time.
Here's the thing, like, anybody who is still in the mayoral race at this point, like, they clearly care about the city in one way or another. They're clearly passionate about it, and we need people like that to push the city forward. But it isn't interesting to see who is still left and who is still showing up to these things. But yeah, that's why we didn't end up doing an episode around it, because as we were listening, no one was saying anything that exciting or groundbreaking, and only 4 of the candidates were there.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer, just to show what like civic engagement in Fort Worth is right now, that for a panel that is run by the Chamber of Commerce, Black Chamber of Commerce, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and the Star Telegram, that they had like 25 people watching on Facebook.
But I joined the Zoom. There was 500 people on Zoom.
Okay, so 525 people out of 800,000.
When less than 40,000 people vote, you're looking at over a 1%. Wait, no, 40,000, 10%. Yeah, you're looking at over 1% watching. Technically,
I mean that's not very good. Like,
I'm not saying that's a good thing, but no, it was definitely a snooze kind of fest. I just didn't think. Yeah, I was more looking forward to it because it just seemed like it was going to be our legit panel, and like they really marketed it as the last panel. But then the student panel on like Friday or something like that, I think, or Thursday, I watched it later on Facebook. It was super interesting and engaging, and it was like student led. And like they had like 100 kids on Zoom, and it was super cool. Maddie didn't make that one, but no. Back to my boy DC. I just think like the amount of time he has had on air, being able to talk to Fort Worth people, to do that. Like if I could take that spot,
yeah,
I would sign me up. Like if you're saying all I gotta do is register, and then I can talk to people at 5 panels. I feel like it would be a good value of brand awareness for the 817 pod.
And advertise SSA the whole time.
Yeah. But yeah, let's dive into the actual conversation on it. To me, the person who really rocked that panel was Maddie Parker. I mean, I don't think it was close. You just can clearly see she just knows how to pitch. I just think she knows that's a good skill set of hers. And I guess when you are from, when you look at who she's raised money from, and also that she started a nonprofit based off of raising money, you could just see that skill set come out of her. And so I just think she really knew how to execute. And then I also know that she is more maybe involved in the entrepreneurial space, like the top venture capitalists in Fort Worth backs Maddie Parker, right? I think she talks about Tech Fort Worth. And so to me, she just really understood that, is why I think she won it. But yeah, I mean, we also thought maybe that was natural because it's the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, I think that was her wheelhouse. And it was sort of what I think people expected to happen, is that when we're talking about business like that someone like Maddie can shine through. But I just found most of the conversation to be very pre-COVID and not looking forward at, we're in a changing landscape where people can work from anywhere. Like, let's switch the conversation from attracting companies to move warehouses here to moving people here that can work from anywhere, that have high disposable income, that like really can help drive the economy of Fort Worth forward. And so that was the conversation that I think across the board just never really got hit. And it just felt very like, oh, how are you going to attract businesses to Fort Worth?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I'm going to tell people Fort Worth is cool. Like that's sort of what the whole conversation
felt
it
was very, I mean, yeah, I don't know what's going downhill faster, Chamber of Commerce or newspapers. I don't know, but it was just one of those things. And and as a young person who wishes he has time to maybe invest and be in I don't have interest, but I just think it just shows the old guard and new guard. And it did feel very like, oh, here's Fort Worth being a suburb again. Here's us being a small town. Like, this was our grandiose kind of conversation. But I mean, also, to be honest, I was a little frustrated how the chamber started with the question around, oh, what do you feel about businesses getting involved and like sharing their voice about the election, and like, is that good or bad? And to be clear, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce wrote a letter on Monday, last Monday, to the U.S. senators to reject the voting reform bill passed by the Democratic House. So like, it's like, we know how you feel about this, and you're not bringing up like, you trying to image yourself. It almost seemed like you were trying to image yourself as your pro businesses standing up to like voting rights, which in the letter they say they are. But like then when it comes to actually the things that we're trying to pass to make voting more equal and equitable, you're actually denying all those things in a letter. Yeah. So that's what, I just felt like, one, to be honest, I bet a lot of local chamber people don't even know this letter was written. But from the foundational piece of what chamber represents, it doesn't represent a future that's winning.
Well, and that's where maybe Maddie's answer to that question felt a little bit disingenuous, just in the fact that she's worked for Mayor Price. She's worked for Representative Granger, who actively voted against certifying the election and voted against impeachment for inciting an insurrection. But she, says something to the effect of, businesses have a voice, yada, 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 just like very canned answer, which just sort of beats around the bush of, no, like your history is with people who are pro limiting voters' rights. Like, I don't know. I would have loved to see maybe a little more proactive step against that, but that's not her lane. Her lane is pitching businesses, pitching entrepreneurship in Fort Worth, and that's what she did well.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like just like this presidential debate, right? The presidential election last year, the chamber and its employees gave more than $200,000 to the Democratic candidates in 2020, the most since 1992. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, nearly 3/4 of its political donations still went to the Republicans. So that means in the best of cases, like the most you've ever given the Democrats as an organization was when we had a lunatic in office who was outright like crazy, and you still were for that over a better America. Like, so on a normal year, when there's like, an Al Gore Bush, like normal people running against each other, like it was a clear who should not be president in 2020.
Yeah.
You still give 3/4 to that. You're no different than Dr. Bird, who gave $2,800 to Donald Trump, the max you can give in a, as a single person. In his second term, I might have forgive you in 2016, but in 2020, Dr. Brian Bird gives $2,800 to Donald Trump. How is that emulates the Fort Worth we need to build? It doesn't. And I guess as an organization like the Chamber, who has the opportunity and privilege to lead Fort Worth's final panel, we got to acknowledge these roots that you also have as an organization. So that's all kind of what made this kind of weird to watch.
Yeah. I mean, I think overall, like we were texting throughout it and just kind of said, like, there's no need to
do the
dedicate an entire episode to this because it turned out to be nothing super special. But if you have the hour and you feel like tuning in, I believe the video is on the Chamber's Facebook.
And we'll put it in the description as well.
Yeah, so that you can find it and watch it for yourself, see what you think. But the four candidates that were there were DC Caldwell, Ann Zeta, Deborah Peoples, and Maddie Parker.
It's interesting. Steve Panate hasn't been showing up lately. He didn't make that panel or the students panel.
I think he's just busy. Like I feel like he just stalks whatever Brian Bird is doing. He waits for him to do something, and then he figures out how to do it in a more extreme way 2 days later. And it's kind of entertaining to watch. But yeah, I feel like his only quote I saw this week was that he was anti-LGBTQ rights, and that's it. That's all he has to add to the conversation now.
But another thing that was just like, this was a really small, but it was annoying. Was, am I on mute? Am I on mute? Can you hear me? Like, nothing sounds like you're out of touch with like technology than doing that. Like, I think you can, like, I felt like we can finesse being unmute or not. Just like, it's kind of like dancing, right? Like, no one knows you make a mistake, or like, just go, like, you know, like, and if, you know, you got to pause and like, you see no one's registering, and you just kind of like, I feel like we always kept stopping. It was like, oh, can you hear me? Oh, like, I just felt like it felt like I was like, oh, this is so painful.
Like we're a year into this and we haven't figured out how to use Zoom yet.
Yeah. Well, I also think this goes into like what else we wanted to talk about when you think of Fort Worth. I mean, Fort Worth, man, I've been losing sleep over this mayoral election, and just like, what is this city trying to do? Because the other big thing too is Aledo, Texas.
We made the New York Times this week.
Yep.
And not in a good way again.
Talk us through it. What happened?
So I guess the content warning beforehand would be around racism and really slavery, and it's like weird to say that, but a group of students from the Aledo High School baseball team were found to be playing a game over Snapchat where they bid on and sold their black classmates based on their appearances. The name of the Snapchat group used the N-word. Yeah, I mean, it was just a really disgusting thing. And the way that Aledo has responded to it is they haven't called it racism. They haven't called it racist acts. They haven't even said how they've punished the students. They've said that there were repercussions, and that's it. And it's just like, how are we in the year 2021 and we've got a group of high school students thinking that it is okay to create a slave trade game on Snapchat in a school district that only has like 10% black students? Like, Aledo has already set out from the start that it's a white place. Like, it is a white people's haven. They want to be separate from the 85% of Fort Worth ISD that is POC. They went out there, they built their own community, started their own schools for white people. And God, it's just sickening.
Looking at the messages that were sent by students at the high school, one student said that one of the students that, I guess, black students, was worth $100, while another one was only worth $1. The message said, would be better if his hair wasn't so bad. And the message group was called a slave trade. And I think this is just like, when is Fort Worth going to be tired of being the stereotypical racist Texas town that the national, when people think of Texas, we constantly have to be the city that represent what people from other places think Texas is like.
Yeah.
Country, racist, conservative, big guns, all that. Sure, we have that, and that's a part of us, and I'm not ashamed of some of that, you know, like being Western or whatever, but when are we going to actually be a place where people are like, oh, that seems like a nice place to go? You know, that's because the other time we're here is Weatherford, Texas, when we're pulling down statues and, you know, you see the crazies out there on the streets going nuts about the statue situation. And so I'm just like, this is just frustrating. Like, how are we going to ever tell the Fort Worth story? You know, like, I think what Deborah said last, one of the last sessions that we had, she mentioned how we're bigger than Atlanta, but look at Atlanta's story. It's so much different than, like, people would never, if you asked any American, heck, you ask any Texan, you don't even have to go to, like, get out of the Metroplex and just go to San Antonio and ask what city's bigger, Fort Worth or Atlanta. They would pick Atlanta. Like, that's how bad we are with our story. And we're doing nothing right now but to really showcase this is just what we want to be. And here's the other big kicker, though. Like, when you really look at the data, 83% of Aledo is white. But here's what I thought was crazy, is that in Fort Worth, our kids, the kids who go to our schools, something like only 6 kids in Aledo, like 9th grade or middle school, I have to look it up when you give your take, was like, there's only that many black people. Like, you can count them on your hands. But in our city, 85% of kids who go to a Fort Worth ISD school are either Hispanic or black. 63% of students enrolled into Fort Worth ISD are Hispanic. 22% are black, right? So Fort Worth is literally the opposite of Aledo.
Yeah.
In its core. And I think the problem is in its core of Fort Worth, where the real magic is at, is constantly being suppressed by the Alliance Center and the companies over there and the stockyards and
Keller
and all this stuff, when that's not actually like the core of the Fort Worth funk, So it's just annoying and frustrating. I don't know when we want to stop being that people.
Yeah. Well, and the other frustrating piece is Aledo tried to bring up like an inclusivity act a few years ago, and a person on their board who voted against that. So a person who is willing to say, no, like, I'm a racist, I'm against inclusivity, was then rewarded by being promoted into being the head of the Aledo ISD board. So it's like, we've got this person up top who literally said, I'm against inclusivity, who is now not punishing students for attempting to slave trade their black neighbors and their black peers. And there's just nothing being done about it. And it seems like there's no push for anything to be done about it either. Like, yeah, this is in the New York Times, but there's no outrage in that area and locally, except for the handful of black families that are there who are trying to say that we are part of this community too. And you are. And you should be valued as the part of that community that you represent. But I mean, who are these kids? I don't care about knowing the students' names, like whatever. But Aledo gets high off of their athletic achievement. We know that these are kids from the baseball team. Who are these kids getting recruited by? Who are they getting scholarships from? What kind of money does that bring into the school district? Yeah. Like, that's what you're protecting over these kids who are just being verbally attacked and it being the subject of racial injustice and racial attacks. And you're just like, yeah, we're going to brush this under the rug.
Yeah, 390 of the 499 ninth graders. So let's go there. That's
75%.
Yeah, 75% of the students. Close.
Yeah.
And only 6 were black of that 499. Right. So that's crazy. Right. But I think you show up, what's something similar to Aledo, to the Chamber of Commerce, to baseball, to Fort Worth. It's the historic ways of doing things, and you're choosing to be on the back end of the modern world.
Well, and I think that choosing, like, choice is the word there. Like, we have examples locally of school districts like Allen and McKinney, who from the start said, we know that Highway 75 running through our city is going to cause division. So in our charter, there is only going to be one high school here. And obviously, like, those places still have issues, but we have an example of communities starting up from scratch saying, we want everybody to be here together. And then we've got the opposite here in Fort Worth, where we've got Aledo building their $400,000 plus houses. We've got more communities going into that area, building in the same range that are generally inaccessible for POC. And obviously there is tons of history and inequality behind that as well. But these areas are saying we want to segregate ourselves. Yeah. We don't want to be inclusive. We want to make us separate from Fort Worth ISD, and we're cool with that.
Yeah.
So it's not like we don't have an example locally of how we can do this differently. We're just saying, nah, we're good.
Yeah. I think we kind of hit it on the head. I mean, like, and I'm not here to say, I'm not saying this is that, the chamber is racist or that baseball is racist. I mean, it's probably arguably, I think, by how things are voted, or that, historically probably foundational, the people who are influential there are probably, I guess, like by their actions could be still racist. I mean, we just looked at the chamber's finances. So, but
nationally,
yeah, but it probably wouldn't be any better if we really looked at it. But, but, I think what I'm talking about here is just old guard, new guard, right? Baseball has been dying for a long time. Slow death. Chamber has been dying. Slow death. I mean, these things are, and Fort Worth hasn't even grown up yet, but it sounds like we want to get on that train too. It sounds like we don't actually want to grow into our shoes. And that is, and that's what we'll see. And I think, and now going to the, talk about chamber, like if, and talk about business. If
and the piece on that real quick is, we talked with Dr. Dixon about how in the Police Officers Association, there's a POA, there's a black POA, there's a Hispanic POA. And that's the same thing with the chamber.
Yeah.
Like, why do we have POAs depending on your race?
Yeah.
Because there is an inherent racist background in them.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do we integrate and bring those together so that we don't have that?
And you allow the power to stay in charge, because then those associations stay underfunded, because then they're relying on only their donations from their people, which we already know is not going to out succeed their white counterpart associations. Yeah, 100%. But here's what's crazy, right? And then we look at the data that came out in a council meeting with Robert Stearns. The Fort Worth report brought it out, which just was released last week as well. It's a new journalism publication. I've so far enjoyed the majority of the stories. FortWorthReport.org. If you haven't heard about it, check it out. But they brought up some data around this turning point for Fort Worth, where Robert Stearns, friend of the pod, guest on the pod, great episode. Check that out. But he showed a bar chart depicting corporation relocation since 2000 in Texas cities. Austin was the highest bar with 54 companies relocating. Dallas was 34. Fort Worth was 8. Plano was 12. Right? Irving had more, which is kind of interesting. I mean, the airport's there, so I could, I might let that one slide. Frisco, 6, right? So, like, if we want to play as we're all like this, we're for pro-business and we're pro, companies and all that, well,
what have you done for me lately?
Yeah, it's like, and what we're not talking about Fort Worth, and I slightly brought it up to Robert Stearns in our one-time conversation, but we should be really afraid of DFW turning to DFP, Dallas, Frisco, Plano. At the rate of population growth year over year, at the rate of businesses, just off these numbers, we could potentially be a sideline city. And what do we got something here. If we can crystallize it and step up into this new, to me, it's that moment. They always talk about blockbusters and Netflix, and the Netflix, one of the co-founders wrote a book about the Netflix story. And he said, we were sitting at Blockbuster and we offered Netflix to them because we couldn't figure out how to make money for $5 million. And Blockbuster said no. Like, what do you want to be, man? And I feel like it's that kind of moment, this election for Fort Worth, which what makes me lose sleep about this election a lot, right? So it's just, I don't know what your takes on that business piece and adding that new kind of twist as well. I know we went from the chamber panel to the Aledo to, this data from the Fort Worth report.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we were talking before we started recording about what do we want Fort Worth to be, and that dictates, especially in this election, who you're voting for. And to me, Frisco and Plano are growing too fast without the infrastructure to support it. Where if you're living in one of those cities, like, you're probably paying, and I kid you not, you're probably paying a few $100s a month just in highway tolls to get to work and back.
Yeah.
Not to mention just being able to go out and drive and do fun things, like just going to and from work. You're probably paying a few $100s in highway tolls. And that's not what I want Fort Worth to be, but that is the result of growth without somebody in charge understanding how to plan and develop a city well. And so that's maybe the interesting piece to me, is that I don't necessarily consider businesses moving here as the end all be all, especially in a post-COVID world where you can work from wherever you want. Like, Fort Worth has 5G. We've got pretty good internet here, I think, for the most part.
The panelists didn't. I was confused about that too.
Yeah.
I was like, fiber, people. Fiber. Like, get you some fiber in your life. Like, it costs the same.
So it's like, that's what we've got to be pitching to people, is like, hey, companies, tell your people.
Irving doesn't have fiber.
Yeah, tell your people that Fort Worth is a sustainable place to live for you working remotely. We've got coffee shops out the wazoo. We've got tons of great bars, places to hang out. Like, you don't need to move your whole headquarters here. But how do we pitch to a company to get on their like preferred cities list for, hey, if you work for us, living in one of these areas is really great. I think that's the next play, instead of how do we get an entire company to relocate their headquarters.
Yeah. And to know, I agree with you. Like, Frisco and Plano has nothing on experience to Fort Worth as a city. Like, it's just a bunch of everything there's being made so fast. There's no actual intentionality in what's being made, besides it just feels like the perfect suburb. I mean, Frisco's like the cleanest city ever. It's like all these suburbs. There's some DSW shoes. There's some, racks on racks on racks, talking Nordstrom's, and it's just like, it is not, there's no true city appeal to it. So we definitely have that going for us.
But I agree with you. Where are the population centers locating to? And is Fort Worth happy to just be a byproduct of their growth? Or do we want to push our growth by developing as an actual city?
Yeah. And that to me takes not an exponential. I mean, if we want exponential returns, we do need to have bold action. And that's where I was getting to. We need to have bold, unique, original thought. We're too group think now. We're too any panel, any conversation. It's like, hey, how do we all agree and like each other and talk about how nice everything is? And we just need to have a bold thing that we're proud of. And I feel like that's why no one in Fort Worth votes, right? Like, there's nothing here to be proud. Like, people are
status quo.
Yeah. People are like, oh yeah, we are who we are. And what also thought was interesting, there was like we have friends in other states. Some of them were talking about how their mayoral elections not separate from the regular election.
Yeah, well, that is part.
I didn't know what
that is part of the systemic suppression of democracy in this city. Is that we hold off-cycle mayoral elections so that people won't vote in them. Yeah. So there's the status quo. Like, I don't really care about it or need to vote in it. But then there's also the piece of Fort Worth set itself up this way on purpose.
Yeah.
And that's because it was essentially a, small town Dallas suburb that has just started to outgrow its shoes.
Yeah.
And so we'd have the opportunity to take the reins of that, or we can just sort of continue on with this status quo sort of life.
Yeah, I mean, that was another kind of, some of that new data here too is around, well, not new data, but, we had, it looks like, I want to say 71% of Fort Worthians voted in this last election. Right. And we haven't broke.
Yeah, in 2020.
We haven't broke 7% since 2001. No more than 7% of Fort Worth residents have actually voted. So look at that. You're talking 10x.
If 70% of Fort Worth voted, the runoff would be between Deborah and Anzeta. Like that's yeah.
So yeah, and so I mean, the highest since 2001 was 2003 with 6.7%, which and we were only at that time just broke 500,000 population. So now we're nearly double that, and we still haven't broke that number since 2003.
Which is crazy because Fort Worth has become such a young city, and you would think that people moving here would fit into this demographic of people that are passionate about politics in general, and that hasn't been the case. And so that's even an interesting piece, that we're at 160% of the population of 2003, but we can't get a higher percentage of people to vote.
It's so sad. We're 85% Black or Latino in our schools. We're minority city,
which just tells you all the things in play, all the things in place to make it hard to vote that Fort Worth has set up to continue to let this establishment sort of create this monotony of what we are.
Yeah. Well, I think we
beat that into the ground.
I don't know if you're still with us here, if you haven't left a 1-star review and, already hated us and, decided that this is not what you wanted to hear today. I think we're ready to talk about the election.
Yeah, I feel you've said you've lost sleep over this election, and I feel like generally I've been the optimist of the two of us, and I feel like thinking more and more about this election has made me like the realist pessimist about things. So maybe that's we've lost some of the balance that we had before.
Yeah, and I think I lost sleep. One, it's because it was honestly painful to figure out who I was going to vote for. Like I like that was, open, voting starts April 19th, and then also it was also just tough because I don't think me and you were expecting this podcast to get as traction as it has so quickly. The people we've been able to curate, the people who've been open, which I guess shows positive of Fort Worth, like the openness and the friendliness, and anyone here is here to support anyone.
Yeah, we're very embracing of passionate people that want to do good things in the city.
Yeah. So I think now, we're into the city, and what we say here, people are listening, and it's people who, I think care about this city. And so what we represent and how we vote, and people who listen to this probably want to know, who are we going to vote for? They've been listening to this since August 30th. We're, the oldest consistent news podcast that talks about the news, and you see us having people regularly listen. They probably want to know. So it's a lot of battles, like what is our purpose in all this? And how bold do we want to be? And so to me, it was just like, that was the part that was tough on, should we go public and endorse somebody? But it makes sense to, if we're going to talk about Fort Worth being bold and not being afraid, I can't be afraid of not being liked, or people thinking negative things about me, or thinking, I don't care about their situation, which is not the case. So that's what I have to let go. But that was keeping me up on this decision and having this pod with you. But I'm ready, and I'm ready to talk about it. And I think let's first.
Or you don't care, and that's cool too. Thanks for listening, anyways.
Yeah. See, and that's the thing. I think that's why we make a great yin and yang, because there's probably people who actually hasn't listened to this. It's just like background noise.
Yeah.
And then there's people who are listening. So, anyways, let's actually what we should do. How long have we gone? We got some time. I mean, let's spend kind of the next 10 minutes talking about like positives and negatives of all the candidates and try to do our best to be equal. What are your positives, negatives? And then at the end, we'll kind of say where we are and then why. And then we'll still do wins and losses.
And when you say all the candidates, you mean Deborah Peoples, Ann Zeta, and Maddie Parker.
Correct.
Which I think we've been very open about.
Yeah.
Like the other ones.
Yeah. Which, I've heard Dr. Bird is throwing that shade like on the direct mails, to Maddie Parker.
Well, he's got to recover from being called out for the Paris, France clip art on fire.
Yeah. No, yeah. And another story about, there was one panel where he was like, I visited Russia once and the whole town was cement. I'm like, are you really trying to scaremonger everyone into like communist Russia, or whatever? Like, I just like.
Also, like, our city is concrete.
Like, But all right. So, let's go through it. Let's start with Ann Zeta. Positive, negatives. What do you got?
I think that the positive of Ann is told by when we look at Fort Worth over the last decade, what area of Fort Worth has exploded in development that is incredibly attractive both to people in the city and to people outside of the city? And the answer is very obviously Ann Zeta's district, right? Like, that covers a really beautiful remodel of Bluebonnet Circle, that covers what's gone on in so much of the near South Side, and even the recognition of, I need to get behind people like Hemphill No Se Vende and protect their piece of this neighborhood and their heritage in this neighborhood. Like, that's all falling under her district. And yes, there have been growing pains in the South Side, but I think that she's recognized that. And I think that she's acknowledged and owned up to that. And I buy into her vision of equitable, livable, walkable communities for everybody.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what's attractive for people moving into those areas.
Yeah.
I think that her negative for many people would just be that if they're choosing between her and Deborah Peoples, she's obviously the more soft-spoken one. She's maybe a little bit more behind the scenes in some ways. And I personally feel like the negative with Ann is of the conversation. Something I do care about is, how do you create a 21st century city that gets tech jobs, gets knowledge-based workers here, that, we are thriving in that space of getting software companies to want to be in Fort Worth, because software is eating up the world. It really is. And so we need to start thinking about, how do we be a place for engineers, scientists, business people to be here with fresh businesses, and how do we create those kind of businesses? And I feel like of the three, she's the least understanding, or I feel like gave off the least confidence. And maybe that's the negative that you're saying, is just like, maybe it's just more quiet and like less, Maddie and Deborah are super strong presenters and has that dynamicness about them.
So, and I think if you're going to convince a, I don't know, a Twilio, a Tesla, or whatever, like you're going to convince a company to come to Fort Worth. You don't got any nature. You don't got anything. Like, it's going to take a salesman to get people to see what you see for your city. And that would be like my worry of Anzeta.
Yeah. I think that obviously like Peoples and Parker approach that conversation differently. And the way that Peoples approaches that conversation is pitching Anzeta's ideas. So that's what I would say is the counter to that negative, is that there is she knows and understands the meat and bones of what it takes to set up a city for that success. And what Deborah especially preaches on how to attract those cities is based in what Anne has a lot of practical plans around. What's your top positive and negative for Deborah?
Oh man, my positive for Deborah is her energy. She is a sales person. Like, she just has that. She can sell Fort Worth. And then I just think she's from East Side. That's a string on my heart. Like, you're playing my music. East Side, Fort Worth, the only person of color who represent a majority city. I believe if she's the leader, I feel possibly most confident that East and South Side wouldn't get left behind. And that is my positive for her. What's your positive?
Yeah, I think that what we have said of what do we want for this city and who is going to go out and hype it up, like that. I mean, it takes like 5 seconds of talking to Deborah to be like, yeah, what are you doing? I'll follow you into it. Whatever it is. I don't care. I'm following you into it. And we know that she has a ton of business experience with AT&T. And I think that really does play a very big practical component in her campaign of, we say we want companies to move here. Like, I've been in that room a lot of, hey, where should we go? What are the pros and cons of these places? And I know what they're looking for. And that I think that is just a very tangible thing that she has that none of the other candidates do, that she can continue to really use to push Fort Worth. And I think that, I mean, it was maybe like January that we talked about on a podcast of, like, if we wanted a mayoral candidate for Fort Worth to fill the role of a Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta, or what's the guy's name from Miami?
Francisco Suarez.
Yeah, like that is going to be on national news as a guest, like talking and hyping up what their city is doing. Like, I see Deborah Peoples as the person that would best fill that role.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I really think that if that's your vision of what Fort Worth needs, then like that's the person who right at this moment could fill that role the best.
Yeah. No, I think I mean, so my negatives of or like my minus or negative for Deborah is it's different than Anne, where I feel like Anne doesn't maybe get the innovation entrepreneurship stuff. She might be actually running the most innovative campaign. She's on TikTok. She's using social media.
Yeah.
And so to me, what's wrong with the Deborah situation is she doesn't show me the ability to mobilize and organize, efficiently or at scale. I mean, I feel like, and I even think there was a part in the Fort Worth report where she said, like, if you're looking for like things to be nice and like spiced up or whatever. Like, I'm not your person. Like she's kind of said something around being like the meat and potatoes. But I think anyways, I just say like her, like that part of me is like where I feel like where she can't be a Francisco Suarez. She could be maybe like, she can definitely be like what Betsy Price was, like a face that everyone loves. Deborah could be a face like that associates with a city very well. But I don't know if she doesn't give me the mobilizing, organizing vibes that I feel like goes with a salesman. That's common when you're really good extrovert. That's a common, like I have that problem. So, I mean, I feel you in a way. So,
and I think that the recognition of that by her in that quote is important. And then the next piece is, how do you surround yourself with people who do that well? Because I mean, everybody has blind spots. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses, but especially if you are trying to be a leader and a face of a city, if you recognize well what your strengths are and can surround yourself with people who complement those strengths well, then those weaknesses don't show as much because you've got those people around you. So I think it's important that she did acknowledge that.
Yeah, here's the quote just to make sure I have it right. I'm not running a high-tech, high-dollar campaign, people said. So if you expect slick things from me, you're not going to get it. Which I feel like that's true. Like her logos and signage is the most outdated looking. I would say the same with like the website. And that could also just go with like just generational kind of like, so like that part's to me like that when you actually need to be high tech, you need to know how to, be sleek, but with less. Mm-hmm. Like that hustle there in a 21st century world, that's probably my like the Achilles heel to her. That has me worried about her.
Yeah, but that's totally fair.
But going to
I would say go
ahead.
My negative for Deborah is, especially recently, she has mentioned a lot about wanting to be known as like the arts mayor, which I think that the artistic culture is already here in Fort Worth, so I don't necessarily know what that means in particular. But I just feel like she wasn't able to articulate that well when I watched back the panel from the Arts Council, and not in, obviously, like we know that she appreciates and curates and is passionate about the arts and the arts in Fort Worth, but there's a practical side of that where how do you create communities that artists can afford to live in, that they can afford to create in, that they have the space to do that in, that I don't necessarily think that she articulated well. And so it's like, it just seems like an interesting thing to be trying to like beat over and over again when during your opportunity to really showcase your understanding of that, you didn't necessarily come across that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, Maddie Peoples.
Maddie Parker.
Maddie Parker. Maddie Peoples. That would be a nice combo, though. Maddie Parker. Positives. I mean, Maddie's dynamic. Maddie to me is the most entrepreneurial ready, get 21st century companies here. I mean, I can't imagine. I would love to watch that lady with a pitch deck talking to somebody because she has the numbers. She knows what's up. I like that she's youthful. She's the youngest of all like the candidates. I feel like her positive is that. And then obviously her positives is her connections like to the today Fort Worth, like for better or for worse, if you're going to do creative things or take creative risk in Fort Worth and try to do modern ideas, you're going to need to find ways for people to fund those things. So that's also a big positive is that you are in the establishment, I guess. Which then also kind of goes to my negative, I guess, is like my fear of where Maddie's ecosystem is in Fort Worth is that I don't think Fort Worth grows. My fear is that sure, we bring the businesses, but it's not the way we want to grow, in the sense of like we become like Dallas, Frisco, Plano, where it's all north, it's all alliance, it's all, it looks all happy-go-lucky, but then you have a bottom half of Dallas that's not loved on, and so all your black families move to DeSoto and Cedar Hill, and all your middle-class black families left the city because they didn't feel respected. That's my fear there. That's one fear. My other kind of fear is like, I don't know what, it seems like you can't really change that, but like your husband being a lobbyist, that does kind of, that's hard. That's hard. That's really close. I mean, you look at who's backing her, you're looking at, it's, to me, people who want Fort Worth for where it is today. And but I don't know. And when I see the commercials, I don't know if she's just doing this because she knows she needs to be a politician and then get the vote, so then she can be a fresher version of a Republican, which I think Republicans need as a whole. Francisco Suarez is Republican. Mm-hmm. And to me, if you gave me more Republicans like Francisco Suarez, his dad was a Democrat, but like intelligent, thoughtful, and maybe that's what Maddie can do. Maybe, but those are the things like that worry me, and how she has played out her campaign to become. She started out trying to brag, saying, "I'm not into bipartisan politics," and all that, and she got very heavy. It started rolling into a ball, and the words you started showing that actually. Because I think, and unfortunately, she had to compete against Brian Byrd, so you got to kind of come over a little bit. But I don't know.
Once you get the endorsement from the Police Officers Association, or to get the endorsement from the POA, that's sort of what you've got to do. Yeah. And I think that, there's probably a piece of self-preservation there, but I don't know how radically people flip because they've taken on the financial burden of everybody around them, everybody that they've been taking money from, which goes across the board, but is more pronounced when you have 5 times as much money as anybody else. The positive of Maddie Parker, and obviously this goes into what do you want Fort Worth to be, is that we know what we're getting. We know what Fort Worth is going to look like if Maddie Parker's mayor. We know what city council meetings are going to look like. We know. And for some people, that's great. And like, that is a major positive for her, is that even though she brings a youthful energy to the stead that Mayor Price is leaving, and she obviously has some differences from Mayor Price, we have a very good idea of what we're getting in Maddie Parker. And like you said, that's also her con, is that when Mayor Price was first elected 10 years ago, Fort Worth looked a lot different than it does now. And are the people going to show up to say, hey, we want something different? Or is the prevailing energy that, we're good sort of treading along with where we are, attracting, 8 new businesses a year, every couple years, and feeling like we are really growing, and y'all means all. And even though we can see that doesn't mean all in Aledo, or for Fort Worth ISD. So that's just sort of the pro and con for Maddie, is that what you're getting, and we know what Fort Worth is going to be in that space.
Yeah. Well, we're here.
Yeah. So I think that we would preface this by saying that I don't think it is a mystery that it would either be Deborah Peoples or Ann Zeta. And I think that it really is worth saying that, like, these are two really good candidates who are passionate about the city and have invested a lot of time, energy, and money into making the city better. And in a runoff, we would happily vote for either of them. But our official endorsement and who we will be voting for in the initial round of voting is Ann Zeta. I think that we both feel for the moment that Fort Worth is in right now, we need to lay the groundwork for the growth that we want the city to see. And I think that it's been very clear that Ann Zeta is the best equipped to set up the city for long-term success. And maybe in a couple elections, if whether it is Deborah or somebody like Deborah comes along who can be that super energetic national presence, like, that might be the time for it. But I don't know. I think personally that Fort Worth is in a really delicate place right now. Absolutely. Where if we try to project growth too fast, we're just going to be playing catch up. We're already seeing the effects of an impending affordable housing shortage. We already have very terrible public transit. We already have a park system that needs to be invested in further and further. And I think that we've seen that one person has been able to articulate really well their plans and ability to support those things.
And here's the thing. And let me try to be nice guy and myself, is that I have gone for months up and down all over the board with these three candidates. Like, you know, when Maddie first started coming out hot, and there's the entrepreneurial stuff and Deborah and just what she means to Fort Worth. And I'm telling you, I have lost sleep thinking about where I was going to vote. And I don't know if other people felt that, because one, I mean, that's a positive. And honestly, I will do more supporting of where Fort Worth is going, regardless of these three who win. I will still believe Fort Worth is in a space that can go somewhere. But like Jimmy says, I think Ann Zeta to me is intentional. She's intellectual. She's just thoughtful. And the base that we need to be foundational in moving the ship, but bringing others. A big kicker for me was the independent redistricting, right? That shows me how much you're not about your side or that side. You're about Fort Worth.
I mean, she's taken that flag and run with it individually, as everybody else on city council has abandoned her.
Yeah. And those are kind of things that shows me that you're thinking about everyone when you think about it. The other big thing that played for me was the best parts of Fort Worth right now are Southside Main and the Aledo West Magnolia. If you're going to bring someone from LA, if you're going to bring anyone to Fort Worth to show them your city and brag about it, you're going to show them that L, right? South Main and West Mag.
District 9.
Yep. And to me, when you have to say, if those streets were an embodiment of a human and you can only pick up the three candidates, it's Ann Zeta. And so curating and stewarding that community and having that intentional because I think what's cool with Ann, I think she has respects of elites and people with wealth and people from the establishment. She's been here for 30 years. I think she can make sure that everyone's included. Because I just feel like that's what she has done as a city council person.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I even said on the pod in January that I was voting for Deborah regardless.
Yeah.
So like this is a vote that has been won by Anne. And I think that like we said, we would be excited to vote for either of them in a runoff. But if we actually look at what Fort Worth needs in this time and place, it is somebody to lay the infrastructural groundwork around what growth looks like.
And has that experience, and has that education, and has that, that glue of everyone in Fort Worth.
And we've seen how it's gone wrong in Fort Worth. We have the Panther Island project just staring at us of this is how to not do this type of work. And I mean, I'm excited that we have two very strong candidates that we think could move the city in a different direction and move it forward. And so, that's it. That's who we're voting for.
Yeah. Well, remember, April 19th, Monday, as you're listening to this, if you're listening to on Monday as a Monday listener, make sure you get out there and vote, people, and tell your friends. And, an exciting time to live in Fort Worth. Let's move to our wins and losses really quickly.
I'll start with my loss. My loss, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, was just the systemic issues around Fort Worth's low voter turnout. And I guess I almost like preemptively say this as a loss, where if we hit like 15% voter turnout, like that's going to be incredible. And like, that's bad. Like, that's terrible that we see something like that an eighth or a ninth of the people voting in this city is something to be celebrated. And so there are obviously a lot of structural things in place that have historically made that the way that Fort Worth has operated. And I just count it as a loss that we're looking forward to this exciting election with exciting candidates. And if we could get 1 out of every 5 people in Fort Worth to vote, like, we should just shut it down. Like, we should call it quits. We did it. And that's a bad thing to be celebrating. Yeah.
And I guess that goes kind of, I mean, we kind of have similar losses. I mean, my loss was the fact that the Texas House gave its initial approval of the constitutional carry, bill. God. And that got approved to basically anyone who wants to carry a gun without a license is just allowed in Texas. And like the reasonings behind it and what people, and especially after like what's going on in the world, like, are you tone deaf? Like, as we record this, rather than waking up to my alarm, I'm waking up to a notification that 8 people were shot in FedEx. Like, when does it stop? And so the fact that that's example of Texas being Texas, we'll see. I mean, it's now in the Senate. I feel like it's going to be harder to do. But I thought that was a loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of Panther Island, my win is that there was a little canal dug and it runs through these apartments that are being built, and it looks like super cool. Yeah. And I mean, we talked about White Settlement Bridge being opened, and it's like, yeah, we're 10 years in the making on this. But I still get a little bit excited when I see something actually happen with it. And so just seeing those apartments resurrected, with like a walkway over a river, it just made me be like, oh wow, like that's a really cool picture. Like that's a place I want to live. And just got me excited for if something like that would ever actually come to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a loss as well. I mean, cities are bragging how they're building tunnels under their cities with electric Teslas.
Yeah.
And we're excited that we have a lazy river. But no, it was dope. It was dope. I'm not, it was dope. Please, white settlement has to stop. We gotta, we gotta change that for real, people.
What if we just start calling it something? Do you think it'll catch on?
Yeah, I feel like you
probably
get enough
not,
people, not us. Like, but
we could start it. We could come up. Yeah,
we'll
tell us if you think of something cool, and we'll start calling it that, and just see if it, takes off over time.
Yeah. Well, my win is going to kind of end it on. We mentioned this story a couple times, or this topic around the Fort Worth Academy for English language learners, where immigrants and refuge, when they come to Fort Worth and call Fort Worth home, they actually went to this school. It's an International Newcomers Academy. It was on the fence of being closed down as enrollment decreased during the Trump administration, and also just kind of being an older school. It was really on the fence of should they keep it open, but they are keeping it open, and it has a new home in a school building that's east of Arlington Heights High School. And I just think this is a positive when we talk about the ever-changing landscape and where we're trying to go. Right, by 2045, there will be more non-white Americans than white Americans, and I think that's the Fort Worth we want to build, is to be relevant in 2045, right? Like, and I think we're bringing those grounds now, which also why it made us think about the candidate that we picked in Ann Zeta. We've watched multiple panels. We've scoured the news. I mean, weekly. We've been very intentional and thoughtful about how to do this. We were even intentional and thoughtful, should we not do this and have an endorsement? But we believe it takes bold action, and we shouldn't be afraid to be where we want to go, because I feel like Fort Worth kind of suppresses everyone to play nice, and everyone just likes each other, and no one actually says anything, and we just all act kumbaya because we love Fort Worth. And we want to continue to be a bold podcast that says it how it is when we don't feel something's right, and also celebrate when things are going well. And also, we change our minds, and we have changed our minds multiple times of what we've liked from Fort Worth. And we're just glad that you listen and enjoy the pod.
Yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.
Get out and vote.